chapter 17 in the book of Revelation is a chapter with a lot of detail. What should I say? The details in that chapter pushes interpretations to come up with very specific proposals for fulfillment. And I don't think we can shirk that responsibility, even if we get it wrong. We have to try, and we will do our best. I am planning to spend one more session on chapter 17, because the paradigm, the basic paradigm, is pretty much in place. Once we have done chapter 17, there will still be some major surprises in the book, but they will be within a certain paradigm that we have already established. So I'm not sorry that we are spending a little more time on chapter 17. Now, here is how I try to illustrate this. You have chapter 12. In the ending of chapter 12, from verses 13 till the end of chapter 12, you have the picture of the woman fleeing the dragon, right? And that is kind of a synopsis of the rest of human history. The cosmic conflict has had a beginning in heaven, and it has had a middle point on earth with the birth of the male child. And here is the ending of the cosmic conflict, told in the form of a synopsis in the end of chapter 12. The rest of the book of Revelation is in some ways just expansions. This is why I put this pyramid and inverted it. That in some ways it is just expanding on what you have been told in chapter 12, in the ending of chapter 12. You're with me? So here is the story told in the form of a synopsis. Revelation 12, 13 to 18 or 17. And then you have, and this is an abbreviated version, it's just an abbreviated representation, but then you have Revelation 13, expanding on what you have been told here. And Revelation 17 pretty much recapitulating chapter 13, just going back to it. Maybe we are slow learners, maybe they didn't get it. Let's try again, So you try to tell it again from another angle, but it is the same story, so you are not beginning with nothing. When you read 13, you have already some clues, you have already been given some clues in chapter 12. And when you read chapter 17, it's not like you have never been on this planet before, because you were there in chapter 13. You see what I'm saying? So the notion of an inverted pyramid here, where you have a story that is being expanded and elaborated on, seems to be the principle, the way Revelation tells its story. And we allowed ourselves to be somewhat puzzled, to be somewhat struck by what image. If I could take you back to last session 2 weeks ago, what sort of imagery seemed to be somewhat jarring, somewhat unsettling, you might say, going from the woman fleeing the dragon to chapter 17. That there you have this image of the woman being persecuted in chapter 12, and then you have the image of a woman sitting on the beast in chapter 17. That whatever we do with that seems to be there is an element of surprise. Certainly John himself is surprised, because he said, I was really appalled, I was amazed, I was completely knocked off my feet, as it were, seeing this, that telling of it. So here we have our basic structure, our basic paradigm. We said also, and this is by way of review, that the interpretation that I wish to favor here is an interpretation where this woman of slander, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, that the blasphemy in question here would be more tilted more to be understood as an act of misrepresenting the character of God. It is not just usurping powers that you are not legitimately entitled to. The theme of blasphemy in the cosmic conflict story is not so much, yes, there is that aspiration to take the place of God. You know, in Isaiah 14, I want to go up and, make myself like the Most High. So there is that element too. But what is foregrounded in the concept of blasphemy is more misrepresentation of the character of God and what is said, what is spoken, what is represented. So that's what's going on here. You also have a woman of power. All of these symbols here in verses 4 and 5 and 17 are symbols of power. Purple and scarlet. Who dresses in purple and scarlet? Yes, sure. So these are symbols of power, of royalty, of majesty, and so that is one aspect of it. And then you have the aspect of persecution. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. So these are, so far we really haven't had much new compared to Revelation 13. The only thing that is new is the symbol of the woman. What this power is doing is not different from what we have been told in Revelation 13, or even in Revelation, or at least some of it in Revelation 12. So, and then there is John's amazement. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed, and we strengthened that a little and said he was appalled. So, again then, here is back to our representation of the expanding story. And now we need to make some specific commitments in Revelation 17. We have been over this somewhat in Revelation 13, but I wish to be a little more committal today and see where it leads. So, adding it up, this is how I would like to represent the story throughout these chapters, starting in Revelation 12 and then going through Revelation 17. Now, let's just review this, because we've done some of it before. What does it mean that the dragon goes away? We did that in Revelation 12. We just need to revisit it. What happens when the dragon goes away? What sort of image? Some of you were here. I know you were here. I remember you were here. Should have given you a quiz. Dragon goes away. What we said in that, the apelthein there, the word in Greek, is a word that interpreters say has more reference to the point of departure than to the point of arrival. It means, what is it? What you're seeing is a vanishing act. Yes, the dragon goes away to make war, but it is the disappearance aspect of it, that the dragon in some ways makes himself invisible, that he sort of takes himself out of the equation, you might say. He has been visible and up front in some ways in the cosmic conflict before, but now he makes himself invisible. That's the notion of going away that we have touched on before. And so in his place, surrogate powers appear, and they are which ones? The surrogate powers are the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. And they pursue, or the dragon who is behind this pursues now a strategy of imitation. And where is the imitation? Let's just make sure we are on the same page, that we have been convinced that there is a strategy of imitation here. Imitate. What's the dragon? What are the surrogate powers doing? How do they appear? What is their what sort of persona do they take on in the world? The wound, yes, the wound. There is the first beast has a mortal wound, and that it looked as if it had been slaughtered, and that's imagery that applies to Jesus. So in some ways there seems to be a conflation or a confusion of identities here, where the opposing side is actually coming forth, claiming in some ways the identity of Jesus. And the second beast. First beast looks like it has, like it was slaughtered. The second beast looks like a lamb and speaks like a serpent. That would have been a legitimate translation, to say it looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a serpent. So there is a strategy of imitation here behind this vanishing act of the dragon. And then in the center of it all, I put slanders God as the substantive issue that is at stake here. What is it? Because the dragon wants to imitate God, but he isn't God, right? I mean, you can imitate God to a point, but it isn't his. If he were just, if the imitation was the same as what God is doing or what Jesus is doing, then there would be no problem. But it is the appearance of being that while not being that, and at the center of that strategy then is the slandering, and that seems to be carried out in the whole biblical narrative from the Garden of Eden. And then we saw the element of persecution. That's in chapter 13, and in chapter 17 the same thing. And then the novelty in chapter 17 is the novelty of a woman that I tried to make the case last time that she is a fallen woman, that there is some correlation between the fleeing woman and the fallen woman, even though they are not identical. We're not saying that the whole people of God fell away, but there is that element of fallenness seems to be significant in chapter 17. And then what happens at the end of this? And we didn't say that very clearly when we did chapter 16, but in the sixth plague, what happens in the sixth plague? Well, I will claim that the dragon reappears. I saw that out of the mouth of the dragon and the false prophet. No, say it again. Out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, there came demonic spirits like frogs. You see that image? Can you look it up? Maybe someone could read it. Chapter 16, verses 13 to 16. Let's just revisit that, if one of you would read it.
Then I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs. They were coming out of the mouth of the dragon, the mouth of the beast, and the mouth of the false prophet. They are the spirits of demons that perform miracles. These 3 spirits go out to all the kings of the world to bring them together for the battle on the great day of Almighty God.
So here you have a sort of triumvirate, the triumvirate of the dragon and the beast and the false prophet. And the beast and the false prophet are the 2 powers in Revelation 13. So they are the surrogate powers in Revelation 13. But now, instead of being somewhat in the background, it looks like the dragon is coming to the surface again in some ways, that he's somehow reappearing. And that sort of closes the circle here, that it was never about the beast from the sea. It was never about the beast from the earth. It was always mainly about the dragon. The 2 protagonists are not the surrogate powers. They are the other power. That's what the cosmic conflict is about. And I just want to say this, and we'll try to emphasize it more as we go along today, that I think has been a problem about Seventh-day Adventist representation. Seventh-day Adventist telling of this story has over-projected the role of the surrogate powers and under-projected the role of the real power. It has really not gotten the proportions right there. So even though some of the things I will try to affirm today in the traditional interpretation I was also want to disaffirm some of it, because I think it has not represented the realities here in the correct proportions. Anyway, see what you think about this. Any comments on this way of representing it, and then we will go on. We aren't finished with the woman, but I want to hear you say more, because you might want to. I mean, are you just kicking the ball to me, or are you going to help me? Yeah. If I also might add to that we have pursued a values-centered interpretation of Revelation in contrast to an event-centered interpretation. That is not to say that there are not events in this story, but we have said that has also been the traditional interpretation has tended to wish to nail down specific events, sometimes at the expense of the values that are contested here. And in the center of the values, contested values, is the notion of slander, of misrepresentation. What is really God? What does God stand for? What is his way, you might say? So, yes. The question is, when does this? The story here. When does this happen? The end of the 7 churches. Well, I'm not sure I'm able to say that, because that depends on how you configure the 7 churches and their role in history and so on. But this is the story told from the time of Jesus till the end of time. The dragon goes away, surrogate powers appear, there is a strategy of imitation, there is at the core of it a stable ingredient. That has always been the problem, the slandering of God. There is persecution, there is an element of fallenness on the part of the woman here, and that would refer to the people of God. And then at the end of this, and I suppose we are mostly interested in the end, at the end of it the dragon reappears. It's a repetition of the stories we've been hearing, exactly. And it is a story. It's a story. I could, if I could just make a little aside here. I was invited by the Adventist theological community is somewhat divided. There is an Adventist Society of Religious Studies that everyone can be a member of, and then there is an Adventist Theological Society that is where you are making asked to make more specific commitments, more sort of belief commitments in the Adventist Theological Society, and they have invited me. I'm a member of the big society. I'm not a member of the ATS, even though I see light in much of what they do. I am somewhat reluctant to sign statements. I have certain reasons for not wanting to do that, but they may be reasons of method more than reasons of substance. But they have invited me to present. They're going to do a session on justification by faith, righteousness by faith in Atlanta in November. And last year when I heard they were doing that, I ran into their leader, and I said, "Are you going to do anything on the new perspectives on Paul?" And I will not say whether he seemed to be familiar with that or what, but he asked me to, he said, oh, so I said, well, you really ought to do something on the new perspectives on Paul. So he very graciously invited me to come and present on the subject of pistis Christou, the question of faith in Jesus versus the faithfulness of Jesus. So I will be doing that. And I have been preparing my talk just now. I'm working on it right now. And I'm saying that one of the basic differences between the traditional notion of righteousness by faith and faith in Jesus is that paradigm has the structure of a doctrine, and the other paradigm has the structure of a story. And I think see what I'm saying? There is a doctrinal structure from the ground up in the Lutheran notion of justification by faith. Even the Lutheran perception of the Bible is that the story of the Bible is merely a foil for telling you about the doctrine. But in the cosmic conflict paradigm, in the faithfulness of Jesus paradigm, the story is not foil for anything. The story is it. That's what you get. You know, the story of God's ways revealed through the faithfulness of Jesus. You know, so I want to foreground there the contrast between a doctrinal perception of truth versus a story conception. And the Bible seems to do telling us stories. And right here in Revelation, it is at it again, for the last time, telling us the story. Well, let's do it thoroughly this time. And John is kind of saying, I'm going to tell you the whole story, from Alpha to Omega, from the beginning till the end, you know, just the big picture. Now this part here, from Revelation 12 to 17, is not the whole story, but it does sort of give us, you have to kind of know what the story was all about, the earlier story too, to get it right with respect to the ending of the story. And that too could be then in some ways an implicit critique of the tendency in all faith communities, including the Adventist community, to wish to distill doctrines when the story wants us when the Bible wants to hold us to the story paradigm. Well, that was a big aside, but okay, let's move on now, because I want to do a little bit of more of a sort of historical perspective here. But the angel said to me, "Why are you so amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her." Now, does he create the expectation that he will say something that will help us understand? Are you waiting now for an explanation? Do you feel that after, when he has told his story, we will understand and we will go out and say, well, you know, it was very confusing before you started, but now we know what it's all about. Well, he certainly seems to create that kind of expectation, and we will see what happens. So are we done with the woman? That's back to Danielle's question. I will tell you the mystery of the woman. So apparently he hasn't told that yet, and so we should be okay. There is more coming on the subject. So just note on the notion of mystery. I take this from good sources. A mystery is a riddle. There is a misprint there. Is a riddle that requires interpretation. The Old Testament background for the notion of mystery would be found in which book? Who is the sort of great source of this type of imagery? More than any other book, probably Daniel. Probably, you know, the Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, those kinds of pictures, where there is a mystery, and the mystery is revealed. And what else needs to be revealed for this to be figured out? The mystery itself is revealed, and then something more is required to fix it. Well, the interpretation, because it is not just a mystery. I mean, it's not just that something is revealed on the level of mystery. It's also that the interpretation of the mystery could not be understood by unaided human wisdom, but was revealed by God. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and Daniel has the interpretation, but the interpretation is revealed to him. It is not, he has to admit, well, I didn't, you know, I'm a good student, I did very well, you know, I got my degree, but that's not why I know how to explain this mystery. I know it because God revealed it to me. That's that kind of picture. So, okay, here is what I want to do a little again before we try to make our more specific commitments. I have proposed before, and I want to do it again now in the context of chapter 17, that, and this audience will find this strange because you have never, that has not bothered you significantly. But that's because you have not read interpretations of the book of Revelation other than the ones that you can buy in the Book and Bible House in Loma Linda. And there are many other interpretations of the book of Revelation. The dominant interpretations of the book of Revelation do not have the kinds of commitments that you will find in Revelation interpretations in the Seventh-day Adventist community. So what is the dominant interpretation among scholars of the book of Revelation, chapters 13 and 17 especially? That the two beasts in Revelation 13 would be what? The beast from the sea is what? It's the Roman Empire. And the beast from the earth is what? The imperial cult in Asia Minor. So there is here a play of religion and state, state and church, you might say, or state and religion, where one beast represents the state, the Roman state, and the other beast represents the religion, the imperial cult, and specifically the imperial cult in Asia Minor, since that is the setting of the book of Revelation. So I have brought a shoe here with me, and I wonder who has the smallest foot in the audience. Anyone here that would volunteer as a small foot? I need a volunteer. I'm serious. I'm not kidding. Yes, that's good. Thank you. We need to get this one right. If you would please take off one of your shoes. And then you put on this one. I have two, so you can have both. You can tie them if you want to. And you want to wear them the rest of the day, you can do that too. Okay, now some of you, we've done this before in some ways, but I want to have from the audience what am I trying to illustrate here? Other than that, my friend who lent me the shoes last night, they are not my shoes, I lent them from a friend of mine who is much taller than me. I have always been amazed when I go shopping with him and he buys shoes. So what are we trying to illustrate? What? They don't fit? Okay. Let's let's do more. So they don't fit. Yes? We're trying to illustrate that the shoe here, what's the shoe? The shoe here in question is the symbols. The shoe represents the symbolism of the book of Revelation. And the symbolism of the book of Revelation proposes a small shoe, a medium shoe, or a big shoe. The symbolism of the book of Revelation proposes a big shoe. And then what is the proposed interpretation? The proposed interpretation by the most accepted scholarly interpretation is that the Roman Empire and the imperial cult in Asia Minor are the feet that should fill those shoes. The shoes of Revelation symbolism. And what are we trying to illustrate here then? That foot is too small for the shoe. Now this, why should you bother with this? Because you have never even thought that there could be some, that it was the Roman Empire and the imperial cult. But if you travel outside the safe boundaries of your own community, you have to make the case that the symbolism of Revelation points to something other, something bigger than the Roman Empire. We can go on and on within our own community and making other types of cases. But I'm just saying that if you're planning to talk to to the outside world, one has to make that case from the ground up and find ways to do that. And I am thankful to you now. You don't have to wear those shoes all day. But in violation of all rules of aesthetics, I will leave the shoes right there. And make try to sort of drive that point home, that the symbols of Revelation proposes a big shoe. It's up to ultimacy. It aspires to ultimacy. And the fulfillment, the proposed fulfillment, the Roman Empire, the myth of the return of Nero, that's sort of the end game of history, the myth of Nero's return. That simply doesn't seem to cut it in relation to the symbols. The foot is too small for the shoe. That's the point I wish to make. Again, this is like preaching to the choir. But, maybe sometimes you will not be singing in a choir. You might be singing solo somewhere, and then you need to know how to carry the tune yourself, and how to carry it persuasively outside our own faith communities. And that's what I'm just wishing to try. Why do I say it so strongly? Because when I came to St. Andrews to do my study of the book of Revelation, the University of St. Andrews, I could see that I was really up against a formidable sort of interpretive consensus on this point, and that we had to carve out new sort of show or make it plausible that something else is in the works here. Here again then, just going over this, even though we've done it a little before in Revelation 13, that the shoe here points to the Roman Empire foot that is proposed as a parody. The Roman Empire is a parody of Jesus, not an imitation of Jesus. But I'm saying that the symbols do not propose parody. The symbols propose a genuine imitation. Parody would be easy to spot, so that's the difference. The proposed fulfillment of the Roman Empire has a local sort of feel to it, whereas the book of Revelation, the symbols, our shoe, has an universal aspiration. And then the Roman Empire fulfillment, if I may say it in more crude ways, in a more crude way, more blunt way, is really quite a trivial idea compared to the mystery, the elusiveness, the sort of, the need to have revelation to figure this out. So you have a trivial interpretation versus a interpretation that I think is more sort of proportional to the symbol. And then there is to the Roman Empire, if you invoke a Roman Empire fulfillment at all, that could at best be preliminary. It cannot be final. It cannot be definitive like the symbols here seem to be envisioning. Yes. I think that would be true, that you could say, is there any specific human fulfillment that would match the shoe, a foot that would be big enough for the shoe, and that you would look more at phenomena and values. And I think that would apply. And in that sense, you could make, you could have a sort of Roman imperial referent to some extent, but probably not on the level of imitation. The sort of the imitative factor, and now the notion of the fallenness of the woman, that they would point us more in a direction of a sort of faith reality. Yes. Well, that's a big question, but I think there are a couple of things you could say. Why would John be writing about the Roman Empire? What good would that do? Just doing that. And the one reason why interpreters think that is because they do not think that the book of Revelation is a predictive, it's prophetic in the sense of foreseeing the future. So there is a sort of a notion that the book of Revelation must be describing the present. It cannot be describing the future. It cannot be describing all of history. It must be, the present reality, and that would be because you can't know the future. You can't know the future. You can't describe the future. So that would be one reason. Yeah, that see, it's in the canon. So even if you had that commitment, even if you said that it is primarily about the Roman Empire, then it needed to have a bigger message to be in the canon. And that could be the notion that there is a sort of wider application in a general sense, but not in a specific sense. Now, that's what makes our verses 8, 9, 10, where there is very specific symbols. This the beast that was and is not and is to come. The 7 heads, they are 7 kings. One has fallen, one is now, and one has not yet come. Those kinds of specifics makes it hard to evade. So this is where you will have to, test it out specifically. Does it work for the Roman Empire, or does it work for something else? Because they are very, very highly specific. So.
Could it be a lot of history?
Yes, in a differential diagnosis of the text here, if you're going to list, options that you might wish to consider, that would be one option. And David Auney, who has written the biggest modern commentary on the book of Revelation, that's his model, that there is a repetition, a pattern in history. So it's not like you're seeing history told with specifics. It is the repetition, the recapitulation of similar things. We'll return to that. Where is the foot that fits the shoe? I'm not going to answer that question now, but I want to consider more seriously, more sort of focused, another option. And the sources I wish to return to, a couple of them we have looked at before. I don't think we have been reading from Eusebius. The first history of the church that was written is in the Bible. It's called what? It's the book of Acts. That's the first church history, you might say, from the earliest church. The second church history to be written was a book written by Eusebius. When did he live? He died, I think, in the year 339. He was a bishop. He was a bishop in the city of Caesarea in Palestine. And he was a contemporary of the Emperor Constantine. And he wrote a book, he wrote a tribute to the Emperor Constantine. And he also wrote a book known as The History of the Church in English. And it's not a big book. I have a Penguin. Books that get published in Penguin Classics are books that are widely read. They're read by lay audiences too. So one should not be shy to take on a book like that. And then I wish to, the handout, the other handout I have given you are the few opening pages of this book by S.L. Greenslade. He writes quite eloquently, so I wanted to use him as a source. And I'm actually going to read a little from his book, Church and State from Constantine to Theodosius. And then there is the book by Peter Brown. And I have referred to Peter Brown here before. Peter Brown is one of the greatest authorities of his generation on early Christianity, or the period called late antiquity, up to about 600, up to the rise of Islam. This is a very well-written book, and I highly recommend it. It's written, it has lots of pictures too, and it is quite a readable book. And I have given you now the bibliography for those 3 books. I want to read now, before we look at the next slide, I would like you to take your handout and look at it on the page 9 there. And here at the beginning, it's just, here you're reading from primary sources. This is not something we're sort of putting in anyone's mouth. We're reading now from a quotation from Eusebius' history of the Christian church. Thus was Licinius cast down prostrate. Who was Licinius? Licinius was one of the generals when the last persecuting emperor in the Roman Empire was Diocletian. He abdicated. He said, I've had it. he tried very hard to save the Roman Empire. And there was a sort of Indian summer of Roman power during the Diocletian. He was the greatest persecutor of the church. The greatest persecution of Christians happened during the reign of Diocletian. Diocletian was not really doing it for religious reasons. It was not a religious conviction on his part. It was purely a political reason. He wanted to save the Roman Empire, and to do that he felt you had to suppress Christianity. And then he got fed up and retired. Croatia, which is not a bad place to retire. And then the whole thing broke open, and there was a struggle for power afterwards. And eventually, who won that power struggle? The Emperor Constantine. He won it. So here Licinius was one of Constantine's rivals for power. This is a bishop of the church writing this history. That's what you need to be impressed by. But Constantine, the most mighty victor, resplendent with every virtue that godliness bestows, together with his son Crispus, an emperor most dear to God, and in all respects like unto his father, recovered the East that belonged to them, and formed the Roman Empire, as in the days of old, into a single united whole, bringing under their peaceful rule all of it, from the rising sun around about in the two directions, north as well as south, long sentence, even to the uttermost limits of the declining day. Two questions here. Does Eusebius think that Constantine is a good person? That he is a person, he's sort of God's man. Does he think that? Does Eusebius think that the Roman Empire is a good thing? Is he happy to see the Roman Empire saved? He thinks that too. Right. So, and then there is a passage there talking about how happy people were at this. They were smiling at each other, beaming eyes, dancing, singing hymns in the city, and so on. They gave honor, first of all, to God, the universal King, and so on. And then, bottom of the page. Thus, verily, when all tyranny had been purged away. Question. Had all tyranny been purged away? Not really, because you have, an imperial reality as much as you have ever had. But that's how he sees it. When all tyranny had been purged away, the kingdom that belonged to them, page 10, was preserved steadfast and undisputed for Constantine and his sons alone, who, when they had made it their very first action to do what? You can complete the sentence. To cleanse the world of hatred of God. So here is a sort of a religious agenda that he is going to do something about the faith. Because what does he need to make this a success? What does, in the eyes of Eusebius, what do you need to make this a success? You need one state and you need one religion. One state and one faith. That's what you need. And that is the man of the church sizing up human reality at this time. So we'll read a little more here, and then we have to cut to the chase here and see what this alternative looks as. The second, or the paragraph break on page 10. Here the author, not Eusebius, is talking. It is Greenslade, and it's quite well done the way he critiques Eusebius's history. There are no reserves in the stilted encomium. What's an encomium? It's a praise. Yeah, tribute. What's your word? Yeah, praise. There are no reserves in the stilted. Stilted means it's very, formal language. With which Eusebius closes his history. No wistful regret for the blessings of persecution. No prophetic fear of imperial control of the church. His heart is full of gratitude to God and Constantine. And it is not only his feelings that are stirred. He is ready with a theory, indeed a theology of the Christian emperor, and so on. So you see, here is, and this is really a very, very foundational piece of literature, because it sees, it gives you the point of view of the church on the emerging reality of church-state relations at the time of Constantine. Now, I want to illustrate this too, but I don't have more shoes. So I'm going to ask for another volunteer. This time I need a husband and a wife. And I see that we have some. So if you would be, if there would be a husband-wife couple that would be willing to step up to the plate and come down here, and I want you to, I will assign to you your roles, and then you will do exactly what I'm asking you to do. Any who is willing to do this for the audience, you know? Oh yeah, somebody behind Brad, Dr. Brad Cole and Dorothy is pointing to you. So you have been offered as our animals for sacrifice. If you would come down here, this is very easy. It's something you do every day, so it's not going to be hard. I just want us to see the body language of Eusebius's treatise on the history of the Christian church. Now, you are going to be the church, you know. So Dorothy is the woman; she is the church, and you are going to be the state. And now I want you to do to each other what Eusebius is describing in his piece, in his book, and that is to give each other a very warm and long hug. Now, thank you very much. And exactly how long did that hug last? I mean, not their hug. Well, the hug in our history books, that hug lasted for a long time. You see, there is an embrace. There is a mutual embrace on the part of on the parts of church and state here. There is the embrace of the state, saying that the state has always had a religion and will always need a religion. It is unthinkable for Constantine to think of a state that doesn't have a cult. Diocletian's cult was the imperial cult. The cult of the new Roman Empire will be Christianity. It is unthinkable for the state not to have a cult. And what does the church think? The church think that this is better than in all my dreams. You know, this is just a dream come true, and the church will embrace, because we're not reading Constantine's version here. We're reading the church's version of how the church sees its relation to the state, and how unreserved the embrace of the church is of the state. That's what we're seeing. Yes. Is this part of the invitation? I'm just repeating it for some people who are listening to a recording of this. Yes, go on.
Did the dragon co-opted the church?
Well, we are only now on the level of hypothesis. We're not going to go to sort of lock it down to the symbolism of Revelation. I just want us to do a historical excursion and look at some things, and then we will see what it leads to. Here are some points. The union of church and state in Eusebius's treatise. The union of church and state is seen as the ideal and not as a problem. Like he said, there is no wistful sort of memory of persecution, and no prophetic fear, you know, of control, mutual control. That he seems completely oblivious to the dangers of this kind of intimacy between the two entities. The church, in order for this to work, and this is another point, and I think we have enough time to do this. The church, for this to work, had to adapt to the ideals of the state. It wasn't only that the state adapted to the ideals of the church. I will have a quotation from Peter Brown in a second on this point. The imperial system was preserved. What is the imperial system? What does it mean to be an imperator, or emperor? It means that you are accountable to nobody. The imperator is a person who is accountable to none. So you have an unaccountable system, and no accountability is required, because the only power to which you are accountable ultimately would be God. There is no accountability from the top down. If there is accountability, it would be from the top up, you mean, to God. So the imperial system is preserved. And the new system, and here I will buttress this with another statement, the new system was more coercive than its predecessor had been. The Christian Roman Empire accepted criteria for coercion and accepted criteria for intruding in other people's private lives far beyond what the pagan Roman Empire had been doing. Here is Brown's statement. I will not take time to read it all. You can let your eyes run through it. But the gist of this statement is the conversion of the church to the ideals of the state in order to facilitate this realignment, this aggiornamento, this reconfiguring of sort of updating or change in the history of the church. He says it's the biggest event in the church ever. And then, this statement you can also read yourself. And here is another statement from a very reputable history of the early church. In practice, says Friend, he died a few years ago, the ancient world had exchanged the guardianship of one set of divine masters, capricious but generally benevolent, for another that would brook no opposition. The new master is a master who is more stringent, more strict, more what shall I say, less tolerant of difference than the old master had been. This picture is from Istanbul. On top of that pillar, in the year 331 AD, when Constantinople was inaugurated as the capital of the Eastern Empire, there was a huge statue on top of that pillar of the Emperor Constantine, and many Christian symbols too on him. So I think our time is up. I'll take another minute and go through these. So does this foot fit Revelation's shoe? If it does, then these things follow. If this foot fits the Revelation shoe, then the union of church and state is the problem and not the ideal. Then there is a notion of the church adapting to the ideals of the state and not the only the other way around. Then there is a hegemonic aspiration that is preserved in the Christian state. The notion of Christian states, the notion of, because if state and religion are going to be together, then you have to aspire for hegemony, for control. And the church will lean on the arm of the state to advance its cause and vice versa. That is to say, the emperor will need the religion to get, to support his agenda. And the church, and they did this very early in the case of Constantine, the church constantly asked him, you decide, you be the final voice on this one. They did that in Nicaea when they discussed the nature of Christ. They did that when they had the controversy in the North African church. So I need to give you one, because I don't want us now to make the mistake of discussing this only on the level of historical phenomena. I want to ask you, and I'm asking you seriously, I don't wish to offend you. Is it unproblematic for an Adventist church or any church in North America to have the American flag behind the pulpit? Is that unproblematic? in light of Revelation's sort of thinking about these issues. I'm just wishing to foreground that. Is it unproblematic for a church school in North America, a faith-based school in North America, to do the Pledge of Allegiance, to require of its students to do the Pledge of Allegiance every day in the morning when the student starts school? Because we're not talking about these things only on the level of historical, sort of for historical interest. We are talking about it from the level of ideology. It is not the history of these phenomena that interests us primarily. It is the ideology, and to what extent residues, and more than residues, of this ideology is very much alive in our time, in our day. You were hugging only for just a few seconds, but that hug has never quite let go. That hug is there. You're still embracing 1,000 years later, 1,500 years later. You know, on and on it goes. There is still that tight hug of state and church that in some ways may challenge contemporary realities, including our communal realities. That's where I wish to end, and then we will try to pick up a week from now and interpret the text and make some more commitments on it. Thank you very much.